This is a true crime podcast. It contains adult themes and content and may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
When a guard would stop and talk to you, you used to stand back and you would yell so people could hear what you were saying to that guard as they walked by or within the vicinity.
But he knew what a convict was going to do before they thought of it themselves. He'd just been around that long, and he was tough.
They'd find Sprocky in about every conceivable place you could imagine, which we would, of course, dump.
They'd wait until everybody was locked up, and he would open his door and run down to cell one and get a bugler can full of Sprocky and take it back to his cells.
She had a kind of a hypnotic power. There were a great many wild cats around the penitentiary, and most people couldn't get near them. But she would stand in the doorway of the cell house and say, "Kitty, kitty, kitty," and those cats would go to her.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Stool Pigeon Saturday. Today I have a special guest named Randy Martinez, who turned me on to Charles Phelps' story a little earlier this year. Randy has worked as a detention officer, U.S. Navy and Navy Reserve captain, and a deputy United States Marshal and investigator, among other positions throughout his life. He is an excellent researcher who has written numerous biographies on United States Marshals that came before him, and today he's going to share a first-hand account of this unique federal law enforcement agency. So welcome to the show, Randy.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Now, can you just give us a little spotlight on your life and what led you to become a United States Marshal?
Well, basically, and I tell people this, is that I was looking for a job when I got that one. I just got out. I went to college and then went in the Navy, and I got out and returned to Great Falls with my family, and got a job at the sheriff's office working as a detention officer jailer. During that time, they offered the U.S. Marshal exam, which didn't happen very often, so I took my opportunity to take the test. I apparently did well enough to get a job interview and then a job as a Deputy United States Marshal.
So it wasn't like a life goal to go that route? You just kind of fell into it and just happened to be a natural at it?
I just fell into it. Originally, I went to college, and I've got an education degree and specialize in health and physical education with a specialty in athletic training. So it's half my degree is in education and half my degree is in physical therapy credits.
What year did you become a marshal?
In 1986, March 31st, 1986.
Did you have family at that time that were they supportive of you going into the service?
My wife and my two sons, and all my other family, my mother, my dad, everybody was supportive of me going into the Marshal service. It was a considerable step up as far as going from a local agency up to a federal agency. And no, everybody was really happy about me getting that job. And it was a good paying job too.
That's good to know, yeah. What was it like working in the detention center?
When I was working at Cascade County, I was one of 6 detention officers, and we had around 100 prisoners on a daily basis. So we had one guy on a shift, and basically I spent my 8-10 hours a day running from place to place to place inside the facility, putting out fires and taking care of people and learning how to deal with people that don't always tell you the truth, what's going on, and sorting that things out. And I think that actually helped me in the long run. I got to learn about people's, you see the same people, you get to learn and meet their families. And I think later on in my career, it actually helped me because I knew a lot of the same people from before. So then at night, back then, there was no 911. So I was also, besides being the jailer detention officer, I was also the county's night dispatcher too, radio dispatcher. So it was a full job.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah, kind of on-the-job training, and you do feel like it prepared you though for the Marshal service and your other career?
I think it did. Yeah. I think it did because in my case, I was in a 2-man office in Helena, and then when I moved to Missoula, I was in a 1-man office. So basically, I was the show, and my boss is basically just left it to me to be responsible and take care of business the way it's supposed to be done. And I think I was successful doing those things because of that training.
Can you talk about some of your experiences as a marshal? Like, what was a typical day, and what were some of the events that you feel really defined your career?
Well, a typical day is, I guess I could say there's really no typical day. The more mundane things were, one of the things the marshal does is bring the prisoners to court for the judge for their hearings. And transporting prisoners back and forth to court from a jail to the federal courthouse for a hearing for a courtroom isn't what I call the more interesting part of the job, but it's a necessary part of the job. That's one of the missions of the Marshal Services, is to support the judiciary. And we do that by providing those services to the judge and the security for the judge too. Transporting prisoners, that's another mundane thing, but it has to be done. There's a few exciting things going on. Early on out of Helena, we transported all our prisoners on their way to federal prison, all the way to Salt Lake City. So we were traveling from Helena down Interstate 15 to Blackfoot, Idaho, house them overnight there, and then the next morning, then we take them down to Salt Lake City to meet the U.S. Marshal's prison jet, and then load them on an airplane from there. So it was a long, we spent 3 days just driving back and forth between Montana and Utah. That's kind of mundane. As far as highlights go, it's actually been, and tying this back into Idaho too, is, one of the things that I don't forget, it's hard to forget, is 1992 was the incident at Ruby Ridge with Randy Weaver. I was doing a mundane job at the time. I was driving back from Spokane with a prisoner on Highway 200 because I had to go through Thompson Falls for another thing I was working on, and came across a wreck before we hit the Idaho border, and I couldn't get a hold of anybody, and all I could hear on the radio was just all heck breaking out, and I found out as I was trying to take care of this car wreck with this lady that was injured, that something bad had gone on, and there was no police officers or Idaho State troopers available to help me with the wreck. By the time I got back into Montana, I was getting frantic calls on the radio, and got a hold of my boss, and he told me to get back to Missoula, load up the truck with all your gear, and you're going to be spending the next whatever up on Ruby Ridge. So
wow.
So I drove to Spokane, came back, loaded it up. Then I went out to the airport, picked up a load of special operations marshals at the airport, and drove them all up to Bonner's Ferry.
Did you happen to know that Marshal Deegan that was shot and killed, like, as it started, or?
No, I didn't know Bill Deegan.
Oh, okay.
But I did know a lot of the other guys that were up on that hillside. That was actually, they had been working on that for a long time. And that what had happened was they were in a transition of switching shifts because they did like a month on and a month off when that incident happened. So by the time I got up there, it was nighttime, and it was kind of unnerving to go up there because there was people gathering at Ruby Ridge on the road up to the cabin, and it kind of had a riot on our hands.
Yeah.
In the middle of the woods.
Man, and were you there for the entire 11-day siege, pretty much?
Yes. Wow. Yes, I was. So that was the day of the shooting. It was when I had the wreck, and then I drove back, and I was back there that night, and then I was working night shift, guarding these positions, and we had people infiltrating across the creek and trying to get up to the mountain and bringing in guns and things like that.
Oh, wow.
And we had white supremacists with not actual real Nazi flags in the crowds.
Jeez.
Yeah, it was kind of surreal. The whole thing was really...
Yeah, a very high tension moment. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, I didn't get in on the arrest, but with the Unabomber with Ted Kaczynski, I actually moved Ted Kaczynski a couple times back and forth to court. I actually talked to him because he was my prisoner in Helena.
What was that like? What did you guys talk about?
Well, he was very quiet, just a very quiet individual, at least when I had him. And the first time I met him, he was sitting in a cell and he was reading physics books in Spanish and in Russian.
Interesting. Okay.
But he was yes sir, no sir, and he was very polite, and that was basically my interaction with him.
I had no idea, Randy. That's crazy. I knew you had been involved in Ruby Ridge, but wow, I didn't realize you had met Ted Kaczynski.
Near the end of my last 10 years of my career, I was lucky enough to be assigned in 2 different areas, program areas, special program areas. I was a sexual offender investigator, so I was actually going after warrants on sexual offenders and working with the state of Montana doing sexual offenders. Which led me into also looking for abducted children. That was a good thing. Yeah. And then the other program which I really enjoyed was in 2003 the Marshal Service started a program called the Canadian Investigative Liaison Officer program, and got training for that. And then they turned me loose and said, "Do what you got to do, make your contacts." And so I was responsible to make contacts up in eastern British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, and then travel up there and then get cases. I'd have either foreign fugitives coming down from Canada, from other countries, or international fugitives that were leaving the United States and going into Canada. So we were going back and forth across the border. And I did get to do a lot of travel up into Canada for that, and still have a lot of friends up there.
So you had quite the grounds that you covered here, like the Northwest and across the border into Canada. Was that difficult, or did you feel like you had a good network of support that you could get things done?
I think I did. I had to develop my network of support. I found out who I could depend on, who I could count on, and even on the fly, I would make cold calls, and I would get anywhere in Canada or the United States, I'd get as much help as I needed. I tracked one foreign fugitive from France who was living in North Carolina, where I'm presently living at. He made his way all the way up to Montana, where he had a girlfriend, and he hiked across the U.S.-Canadian border into Alberta, caught a bus across Canada, and I caught him in Ontario in a bus. But me cold calling the Thunder Bay Ontario police, I got a whole SWAT team out, and they pulled him off the bus, and no one got hurt. So that was the good part about that. So that's an example, a couple examples of the kind of stuff we did. Yeah. My first case was a Tennessee case with the up in Calgary. They had a serial trial rapist that left Tennessee, was on the Tennessee top 10 most wanted, and we located him up in Calgary. I sent a friend of mine out there to look for him. He found the address, and they banged on the door. The guy opened the door, and there was a child he had just abducted inside the house, and they arrested him on the spot.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
And before he had a chance to molest the child. And then we got him back to Tennessee, so he's still sitting in prison, I think.
That's amazing. Did you ever have to use force in any of your career? Or?
I've had to fight people, which I don't really enjoy that much anyway. But a good example is I was looking for a serial rapist in Montana, in western Montana, off of a state warrant, and a probation officer and I were up at Lolo Pass, and we're handing out flyers because we knew he might be in the area. Walked into a bar, and I saw somebody walk out the back door, and we followed him to the back door, and it was our man. He ran to his car, me chasing him, then we ended up having a brawl outside of his car. He got into his car, started the car, and he drugged me about 50 feet on the pavement. So I had a good road rash that night. So that's an example. I've had a few other instances in courtrooms where prisoners got a little unruly, but that's probably one of the worst ones I've had.
Yeah.
Being drugged by a car.
Oh, yeah, I can only
which I don't recommend for anybody to do. Don't do that.
Don't do that. Yeah.
Don't do that. But we got him. So that's the good part.
Yeah. So this last episode, we covered Charles Phelps, who worked in southern Idaho in the 1880s, and it led to a series of murders that he committed. And can you kind of compare how his job would compare to yours 100 years later? Like, how has the Marshal Service evolved over that 100-year span?
Well, the Marshal Service, actually, we're doing the same basic job that they did back in 1789 when the Marshal Service was formed. It wasn't the Marshal Service then; it was just the Office of the United States Marshal. Mm. We're still serving process. We're still arresting people. The good thing is, instead of horses, we're using SUVs and cars and jet aircraft to get prisoners around. Mm-hmm. We're still using the same legal system, seizing vehicles, seizing houses for criminal activity, boats on the high seas. I even seized a boat in a lake in Montana under the U.S. Admiralty laws, which goes back to Old English common law. And the terms we use are still the same. The way we do things are pretty much the same, except for it's more regulated. There's more regulations. It's stricter. It's not kind of a free form, you make it up as you go kind of thing. There's actually rules and regulations we got to follow, and legal things, legal cases that we have to follow. We got to follow the law, because we are enforcing the law. Mm-hmm. But it's pretty much the same. Back then, I know, like during the time of the 1880s, they used to get paid on a fee system. And if you went out and served a piece of paper, you got so much money for serving a subpoena. Or if you seized a piece of property, you get a part of the proceeds of the sale of that property. That was your take. So it was to your benefit financially to do those things. Yeah. A lot of times, if you arrested somebody, you got nothing.
Yeah, I found several of those auctions that Charles was leading in town for these kind of criminal auctions, basically stolen goods. And I was curious where that money went, if he collected that or if it went to the judge or how that works.
Well, part of the proceeds he kept, and then the rest of it had to go to the marshal.
Okay.
Because the marshal was the presidentially appointed person, and the deputy marshal is appointed by the marshal.
Oh, okay.
The marshals themselves, the presidentially appointed marshals, back then were also responsible for the finances of the court. So they paid the wages of the judges, and also for the clerk of courts and all the other staff members of the courts, of the court family, including the U.S. Attorney's Office. So the marshal was responsible for those things, and he was even bonded over. They had to basically pay a performance bond to the government before they could be appointed marshal back then, just in case something went sideways.
Gotcha, yeah. So what's the process for a marshal to, I guess, gather a case and enforce the law? Are they handed something from a marshal, like a deputy marshal is handed a document from a marshal who receives it from a judge?
Well, usually what happens is somebody performs a criminal act, whether it be escaping out of a jail, do a probation violation, parole violation, or any number of violations. Impersonation of a United States Marshal, that's a crime. And then I go out as a criminal investigator, and I can actually go out and investigate that crime, interview people, and gather my probable cause to see if there actually was behavior that rises to criminal behavior. Okay. That's how I develop my probable cause, to see if there can be a charges brought against that person. So that's one way. That's a criminal investigation. I've had escapes. Okay, the person was in jail. He was legally in jail. He broke out of jail, and then where he went, and then he was cited in a place where he wasn't supposed to be. He was out of legal custody, and then I can charge somebody with escape. There's a lot of different aspects to this job. Serving process and court orders is a different thing where I've received an order from the court and I have to execute in a legal manner, whether it be serving a process, seizing some assets, arresting somebody as an order from the court, an arrest warrant, because the judge, like somebody failed to appear at court. That's an example of what happened to Randy Weaver.
Yeah.
There was charges against him originally. He was let out on bond, and then he failed to appear for court. That's an example of that. So then it went from the ATF, where it was originally a gun charge, and then he made it to court, and then he failed to show up at court. And then the marshals were charged of bringing him back in because he's under the jurisdiction of the court, and the marshals are the enforcement arm of the court because the court can't physically go out and do it.
So in Phelps's time, he was arresting people for unlawful cohabitation. He's kind of helping enforce that. How did that fit in kind of with that purview?
Back then, the marshals were the law. The U.S. Marshals were one of the few federal agencies that actually had powers of arrest. There was no FBI back then. The Secret Service had just formed in 1865, and their specialty, besides protecting the president, was going after treasury counterfeiting, treasury crimes, and counterfeiting of money. That was their specialty. Before the Secret Service was there, it was the marshal's job to go after people that were counterfeiting money. So they'd go out and do their thing. We were the enforcement arm. We're the enforcement of the courts, and we're also the enforcement arm for the president too, through the attorney general. We're the enforcement branch, and the Marshal Service still is the enforcement branch. It's not primarily an investigation, but we do have powers of investigation. In fact, we're the only agency that in our credentials says we're authorized to enforce all laws of the United States of America, not just certain sections like the DEA can only do drugs, narcotic crimes. ATF does alcohol, tobacco, and firearms crimes and related things to that. So we do a little bit of everything.
Yeah. Do you feel like the marshals have kind of the most authority, I guess, in enforcing laws over other, the FBI or other departments?
We have a lot of authority, but it's used very judiciously. We have the legal authority to do it, but there's other agencies that specialize in different types of crimes.
Is there a lot of collaboration? Like, for instance, Ruby Ridge, where it was the DEA and FBI and USMS, you were all collaborated during that. Was that a pretty common experience for you?
Oh. Yes, especially in smaller rural states like Montana and Idaho. We do work together. We all got along. I think where you see a lot of headbutting is at more or less on the higher levels, but everybody seemed to get along just fine. There were so few of us to do things. Anytime I went on to an arrest warrant, when I was by myself, I had to get at least another person to go with me. So I was always working with a sheriff's office or another federal agency. A friend of mine had the office next door to me. He was a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service agent, special agent. And him and I would go out and go look for people if he was available. So you never know where you can get your help at. My philosophy is make a friend wherever you go. You never know when you're going to need it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. For a 1 to 2 man team for a whole, state or a whole area, that I can only imagine that has to be your motto.
I see on the news where they're always having a big SWAT team and they got 25 people there and stuff like that. I was lucky if I could scare up one or two other people to help me.
That is so crazy. Did you ever have any close calls that you're like, I am lucky to be alive after this?
One time in Helena, there was it was kind of a sad story. This guy walked into a Carroll College, which is a private Catholic college in Helena. This guy walked in with a gun and he shot and killed a lady that was working in the cafeteria. All heck broke loose, and all the cops from the area in Helena kind of converged on the college campus. And by the time we got there, he was up in a tree and he was with a rifle and he was taking pot shots at everybody.
Jeez.
So all I remember is I got real small behind a fire hydrant.
Oh my gosh.
I've had a few other instances. Like I remember one time I was in Butte, Montana, and I was looking for. I had a warrant for a guy. Me and my partner. I found this guy. He was inside of a camper behind a house, a truck camper, and I opened up the door, and as I opened the door up and I saw his face, he was reaching up and he pulled a gun out. He was getting ready to shoot me, so I got him first.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
I remember reaching up and grabbing him by the neck and telling him not to do that. So just little things like that. I just, there was other tense things that we did, but it is what it is. I just
just little things. I like how nonchalant that is to you, but to the rest of us, to the listeners out here who aren't in law enforcement, wow. What did you do? Did you have any, hobbies? Will you go home and play guitar or go golfing or anything like that outside of work?
My boys and I, we always liked hiking in the woods, and which is nice about living in western Montana. Anywhere from our house, 10-minute drive to national wilderness.
Yeah.
And rafting around Missoula, there's a lot of whitewater rafting. You're not that far from salmon.
Yeah.
A lot of people go down there, go fishing, a lot of outdoor stuff, things like that. I think positive things for kids to do. I enjoy my kids. I even enjoy my grandkids now. That's the kind of I'm always trying to find things for them to do with the kids.
Yeah. Did it ever cause strain, like in your relationships, just the stress of your job, or do you feel like you were good at compartmentalizing and like leaving your work at work and having your home family life separate?
I think I'm pretty good about that. My wife worked in medical. She worked at hospitals and worked for doctors, and she worked night shifts and rotating shifts, and then she even got a job for a while. For a couple of years, she was working as a 911 dispatcher, so she knew what was going on. And her brother was also a deputy sheriff too. And I think you can't just hold that in and just, at some point, there's a certain level where it's, even though you might like it, it's still a job.
Right, yeah.
And you got to think, what's more important, my job or my family? And it's even though my job is important, I still got to take care of my family. And you can't bring home a lot of that stuff. Yeah. You really can't. Some of the awful stuff you've seen, that just, especially in the sex offender stuff. Oh. Yeah, you can't bring that home. Mm-hmm. And you have to have a way to just blow it off and just let it go.
Right. Well, I appreciate your service and everybody in law enforcement. To see that you still have so much joy, like just speaking to you, and you love researching and you love uncovering these stories of previous marshals, like that is just a testament to you as a person and to your career. That's really amazing.
I think you got to have more interests. I really do. I mean, you just can't just be one-track person. I'm always doing something different. I'm editing a book for my former work partner, and it has nothing to do with any of this.
Yeah. And what's this book you're working on? Is it something that we'll see?
Who knows? He supposes he's got a deal worked out. It's a book on group survival. Oh. He's an interesting person too. Besides being a deputy U.S. Marshal, currently he's a private investigator. But before that, he was on a Halo team for Army Special Forces, which is high opening, low altitude opening of parachutes. So he was on an Army Parachute Special Forces team. So he's taking all his knowledge from the Marshals and from the Army Special Forces and combining it into a book on this is how to survive out in the wilderness. Everything goes to heck.
Yeah. This
is how you do that, even to the point of, okay, we got to treat people right, and you got to be fair. And this is how to set up a government, basically based off the United States Constitution. You got to be fair to people and things like he thinks about those kind of things. It's a good book. So.
Yeah, I feel like that'll be popular here in Idaho for sure, and
probably Montana or even North Carolina.
Oh yeah.
No, but he even talks about how to navigate by the stars, how to navigate by the sun outside, how to preserve food, how to get clean water, shelter, warmth. It's just the basics, and he builds it on up there to an organizational structure and how to make a small community. Let's say there's no more police. Mm-hmm. Let's say there's no more courts. So this is what you do. how to treat people fairly, things like that.
Rebuild civilization, kind of.
Basically, that's what it is. As I said, it's a survival guide for dystopian times.
Yeah, yeah. To get back to Charles Phelps and the Marshal Service, 1880s, how did you come across this story? What's your interpretation of his life and crimes? And do you think that maybe the stresses of his job or maybe a lack of training maybe could have led to his criminality? Or what's your interpretation on all that?
Well, as far as I can tell, Charles Phelps, from his own words, was born about 1857 in Ohio. And like a lot of young men, and back then, they came out west. And one of his occupations he's listed was blacksmith. So I'm sure he was working as a blacksmith. Mm-hmm. He made his way to Idaho, was working as a blacksmith. And back then, if you knew somebody or somebody liked you and needed a deputy marshal, if the marshal liked you or they got to know you, you got yourself a job. And usually those jobs back then, they weren't careers. They were appointed only for the time that marshal was in power. When that marshal left and was succeeded by another marshal, they were all replaced. So it was back then. It was more of a temporary job. And I think he came out there. He was a blacksmith. He was a cowboy. He just did a little bit of everything, and made it out. And he was a product of his time. You had tough guys out there doing hard work and hard labor, and a marshal was another one of those jobs that it took tough guys back then to do those jobs. Mm-hmm. As far as the enforcing laws, the laws were what they were back then. Charles Phelps was a deputy marshal. What was going on at that time out in southern Idaho, in Utah, and Montana? The big factor of southern Idaho and Utah, which I wasn't that familiar with until I started digging into this, was the fact that there was the anti-polygamy laws. Mm-hmm. On a couple levels. Is one, the religious mores at that time and what was going on, and still to this day there's some of that going on. It's in isolated sects, and they were enforcing it, because one of the other things that factors into that was a lot of the Mormon polygamists were also taking the sides of the Democrats, who were also Confederates back east. Mm-hmm. And the Republicans were in political power at that time. So it's kind of like a little bit of both. They were enforcing it, but it was because who wanted to be in political power? If the Mormons were backing some of the Democrats, then the Republicans took offense and used those anti-polygamy laws to punish them politically. As far as how I found out about Charlie Phelps, I was actually writing a biography on William F. Furry, who was the appointed U.S. Marshal in Montana. And back in 1891, he got a lead and a flyer about Charlie Phelps killing a man named Heber West out at the 555 Saloon in Pocatello. That's when he got that, and he tracked him down, which is actually a good story. So that's how I researched in the biography of Furry, and I was going, who's this guy Charlie Phelps, and what's going on? I just kind of fell into it. I found some more stuff on the internet. Then there's also the program that was for the newspapers, Chronicling of America. It's a website run by the Library of Congress that has old newspapers that you can access. I started reading.
Yeah. I went through the story this last week, and I could not find an end to it. I don't know what happened to him.
And I've been digging more and since we've been collaborating back and forth a little bit as far as digging up information, I haven't either.
Oh.
This is out of the Salt Lake Herald Republican of April 27th, 1910. He says, possessed of his old-time desperadoism, Phelps headed a gang of thieves and highwaymen into Buell in early March to prey upon the gold-seeking travelers into the new mining camps at Jarbidge, Nevada. Several of the members of the gang are said to be imported from Salt Lake by Phelps. Phelps has been known as the high priest of the Intermountain Yeggmen, skillfully evading lawmen. That was the last thing I could find.
Yeah.
The sheriff in Twin Falls sent out a flyer with his picture from his Utah prison mugshot, and there was actually a couple people arrested in one in Cle Elum, Washington, and another one in, was it Harrisonburg, Oregon, up by Hood River.
Uh-huh.
So they were both arrested, and they were eventually let go. But that was it. The high priest of the Intermountain Yeggmen just faded into obscurity.
Yeah. There's got to be something out there.
I found one little news article. I don't, and the name Charlie Phelps isn't that uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
I found a guy up in northern Idaho. I think it was somewhere around up by Coeur d'Alene.
Mm-hmm.
Was crushed by a elevator at a feed store in 1910. But I think it's another Charlie Phelps.
Oh, it's so much
that would have been a fitting end. To Charlie gets smashed by an elevator doing some mundane job.
Right.
But I don't think it was Charlie.
Yeah.
Or Charlie. Yeah.
Well, we'll have to do an update. If any of us come across that, whatever happened to him, if he crossed the border, if he went up to Canada or went south to Mexico or east and changed his name, I have to know. I hate that mystery.
I've still got a case. I've still got an outstanding case like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. if you go on to usmarshals.gov, and people can go on to usmarshals.gov, and you can look at all the different responsibilities the Marshal Service has. Judicial security, fugitive apprehension, prisoner operations, seizing assets, the witness security program, witness protection program. That's us.
Huh.
You can see all that stuff. But if you click there on the main page, there's a picture of the United States, and you can click on the individual districts.
Yeah.
And you can see who's the most wanted individuals for each district. When I say Montana's a district in itself, Idaho's a district by itself. The state of Washington has 2 districts, east and west. California has 4. They basically reflect congressional districts. But I've still got David Berger. And he's another interesting one. He had started a militia up around Kalispell, Montana, and he went to prison for doing that because they infiltrated the sheriff's office, and they had a list of names, and they were going to go around and they were going to shoot and kill local officials. And he got caught with that. They buried caches of weapons everywhere all over northwest Montana. And he was captured, tried, and he went off to prison for 7 years. He came back, and he was on supervised release, which is like parole in the federal government. And he went on a wild chase. If you look up David Berger, there's a video on. He's actually been on some of these crime shows. There's an actual video, dash cam videos of him being chased up in the hills in Montana. And that was on my birthday in 2013, June 14th of 2013. And so that's how I spent my birthday up in the woods looking for him. He disappeared and never has resurfaced.
Well, we'll keep an eye out for him. We'll definitely post that video.
Yeah, he was taking pot shots. He actually, one of the deputy sheriffs, when they got in a gun battle on top of the mountain, he's shooting at each other, and then he hightailed it off the mountain somewhere. We don't know where he went to. I think the wolves got him.
Oh man,
the wolves or grizzlies or something like that. That'd be my bet.
Yeah,
because he was too mouthy of a person to not say anything by now. He always had to shoot his mouth out.
Thank you so much. You've shared so much today. I feel like listeners kind of get a better idea of what a marshal's job is like. Is there anything else that you'd like the public to know about what a deputy U.S. Marshal, what a U.S. Marshal does, and the importance of that position within our government agencies?
I think when the government agency, the Marshal fills, and it was founded under the First Judiciary Act of 1789. It fills a gap. It's The marshals were formed for every district because they wanted to have the marshal job was filled by individuals from that district. So it's a way to have a local person representing the federal government. So you have a local face, and it's still that way.
Yeah.
Your government's not some nebulous thing just out there in Washington D.C. land back east. I can't say, it's hard for me to say back east now since I'm living back east.
Yeah.
or I call that the north now, the northeast.
Right. Yeah.
Because I'm in the southeast. The Marshal Service was a way back then to have local people running the federal government, operating the federal government, put it that way. And even though there's orders that come from Washington, D.C., you also have people from that local area that are actually making the decisions on the ground, and they know who the people are the local people are in that area. I think that's really important. That's a real important function that was been codified into law from the beginning of time for the United States. That we're still, even though we have a federal government, the federal government is actually run by local people and operated by local people, I should say.
Well, it's been great speaking to you. Thank you so much, Randy, and thank you for your career.
Well, I enjoyed it. It's fun. Thank you for your career. I mean, this history thing, that would be a good second job as sitting there working at a historical society or something like that.
Oh, absolutely.
It sounds like fun to me.
I love it, obviously. Yeah.
It's a good thing. I've met a lot of nice people because of that, to doing this stuff. You can give people my email address. If they want anybody to do any research on Marshal stuff, I've had people write me letters over the years. Hey, I heard my granddad was a U.S. Marshal in Montana, and this was his name and stuff like that. I'm more than happy to do research for people too.
Oh, that's great.
It's interesting to me. So.
And how can people reach out to you? What's your email address?
It's R.A. Martinez 14@hotmail.com.
R.A. Martinez 14@hotmail.com. All right. Well, I hope listeners, they have some questions for you, and then shoot him an email.
I had my the biographies online, and then the Marshal Service IT guys took them off. Yeah. They took a lot of stuff up, not just Montana's, but every other district. I am putting it on Facebook, U.S. Marshal Service Association. People can look on that website too. It's USMSA.com. As far as deputies right now, it's still a small agency. It's less than 4,000 operational deputy U.S. Marshals. There's over 14,000 FBI agents. So it's a little more exclusive club than the FBI.
Yeah, yeah, just a little there.
That's how much smaller the agency is, but you're still covering the U.S., all our territories from Guam to the Virgin Islands.
Oh my gosh.
And then you're factoring in things like I did international, like I wrote in that one thing, I did an international extradition. My stellar extradition was going to Holland. Us avoiding pot cafes. You see all this smoke coming out, and you're walking along a canal, and you're dodging pot cafes with all the smoke coming out. Because nice place. I'd recommend traveling to Holland anytime. Great pastries, good beer, cold beer.
Oh, good, yeah. All right, Randy. Well, we like to end our show with a little tagline. If I were to say, do your own time, how would you respond to that?
Do your own number.
Hey, you got it. Nice.
That's right. Nice talking to you.
Nice talking to you, too.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, take care.
If you enjoyed Behind Gray Walls, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Not only do we get to hear your feedback about the show, but it helps others find us as well. If you're interested in finding out more about the podcast and to see mugshots of the inmates featured in today's episode, follow our Facebook group at Behind Gray Walls Podcast. And new this season, we have a podcast Instagram as well. You can find us on Instagram at Behind Gray Walls Pod.